The rain, a relentless curtain of silver beads, had been falling for 3 days straight, mirroring the persistent ache behind Clara's ribs. Her apartment, usually a sanctuary of warm hues and cherished clutter, felt like a beautifully appointed prison. On her worn mahogany desk, nestled amongst stacks of overdue bills and unopened letters, lay a paperback with a garish yellow cover, Why the Worst Advice Turned Out to Be the Best. She'd bought it on a whim, drawn in by the audacious title, hoping for some miraculous antidote to the quiet despair that had taken root in her life. She traced the embossed lettering with a thumb, the paper slightly damp from the condensation on her forgotten teacup. Outside, the city hummed a muted, melancholic tune. It was the kind of weather that invited introspection, or perhaps self-pity, and Clara had indulged in both liberally since Michael left. Not with a bang, but with the soft whisper of a closing door and a note that simply said, "I need to find myself." He'd left behind a half-empty bottle of her favorite Merlot, a tangled charging cable, and a gaping void in her carefully constructed world. A sudden gust rattled the window pane, and Clara shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. She should be working, she knew. Her freelance design business was barely treading water, each new project feeling like a monumental effort she was too exhausted to undertake. But the words on the page of the self-help book seemed to mock her, promising transformations she felt utterly incapable of achieving. How could the worst advice be the best when all the advice she'd ever received, all the well-meaning platitudes from friends and family, had done little more than highlight her current desolation? She sighed, pushing the book aside. The truth was, she missed him. Not just the physical presence, the warmth beside her in bed, the shared laughter over burnt toast, but the way he'd made her feel, seen, cherished, alive. Now she felt like a fading photograph, her colors muted, her edges blurring. The rain continued its relentless drumming, and Clara, for the first time in days, felt a stir of something other than sorrow, a flicker of defiance, a tiny spark of rebellion against the encroaching grayness. Perhaps it was time to stop waiting for the storm to pass, and instead, learn to dance in the rain, or at the very least, to open the window and let some of the cool, damp air in. The thought, amorphous and nascent, began to solidify. Dancing in the rain, or even just opening a window, felt less like a grand gesture of defiance and more like a quiet insistence on her own existence. She rose from the armchair, the worn velvet creaking in protest, and walked to the large window overlooking the perpetually weeping city street. The glass was streaked with rivulets, distorting the familiar red brick of the building opposite into an impressionistic blur. With a decisive click, she unlatched the window and pushed it open. A gust of cool, damp air, smelling of wet asphalt and distant earth, swept into the apartment, rustling the sheer curtains and carrying with it the persistent murmur of the rain. It wasn't a sudden epiphany, no dramatic clap of thunder to announce a new dawn. It was subtler, like the slow, steady drip of water eroding stone, a gradual shift. The cold air, rather than chilling her, felt cleansing, a visceral reminder that she was still capable of feeling something beyond the dull ache of absence. She leaned against the sill, letting the fine mist kiss her face. Her freelance design work, a chaotic constellation of half-finished projects and unanswered emails, lay accusingly on her desk. For days, the screen had remained dark, a silent testament to her paralysis. But now, looking out at the rain-washed world, a different kind of image began to form in her mind's eye, not of sorrow or loss, but of sharp lines and vibrant colors, a design concept entirely new, entirely her own. It was a fleeting thought, a wisp of inspiration, but for the first time in what felt like an eternity, her professional future didn't seem entirely bleak, entirely dependent on someone else's presence to illuminate it. The self-help book, still open on her bedside table to a chapter about embracing change, seemed to mock her with its cheerful platitudes. She closed it with a soft thud, the sound oddly definitive in the quiet apartment. Her defiance, a nascent ember minutes ago, now sparked with a quiet resolve. It wasn't a grand theatrical declaration, but rather a quiet, internal turning of a key, unlocking a door that had been jammed shut by grief. She walked away from the window, the chill of the glass lingering on her fingertips, and approached her dormant workstation. The black screen reflected her tired face, a ghost in the dim light. With a deep breath that hitched slightly in her chest, she pressed the power button. The hum of the computer booting up was a small, familiar comfort, a sound that usually signaled the start of a productive day, now a promise of a new beginning. As the desktop icons populated the screen, she bypassed the usual folders for client work, her gaze drawn instead to a blank document. The design concept that had flickered in her mind at the window began to solidify. Bold geometric shapes, a palette of deep indigos and fiery oranges, a stark contrast to the muted tones that had dominated her recent commissions. This wasn't for a client. This was for herself. A visceral need to create, to channel the raw energy of her pain and emerging defiance into something tangible, propelled her fingers to the keyboard. The first few lines of code, the initial brush strokes of digital color, felt like a small act of rebellion, a reclaiming of her own narrative from the shadow of Michael's absence. The rain, a relentless percussion against her window pane, seemed to soften its drumbeat, almost in deference to the quiet intensity blooming within Clara. Hours melted away, marked only by the deepening twilight outside and the growing complexity on her screen. She worked with an almost forgotten fervor, each click of the mouse, each stroke on her digital tablet, a deliberate act of creation. The geometric shapes twisted and interlocked, forming an intricate tapestry that spoke of both chaos and order, much like the landscape of her own heart. The indigos bled into oranges, a fiery sunset against a stormy sky, a visual metaphor for the tempest raging within her, slowly giving way to a nascent hope. She hadn't eaten, hadn't checked her phone, hadn't even registered the chill that had seeped into the room. Her world had narrowed to the luminous rectangle before her, a vibrant universe she was meticulously constructing. When she finally leaned back, stretching the kinks from her neck and shoulders, the digital canvas before her was a finished piece, pulsating with an energy that mirrored her own newfound resolve. It was raw, unpolished in places, but undeniably hers. A fierce pride, hot and unfamiliar, surged through her. This wasn't merely a design. It was a testament, a defiant shout against the encroaching silence Michael had left behind. And in that moment, for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Clara didn't feel like fading away. She felt real, solid, and unequivocally present. The rain, a relentless drumming against the window pane for 3 days, seemed to falter, its rhythmic insistence giving way to a softer, more sporadic patter. Through the grimy glass, a hint of bruised purple light began to fracture the oppressive gray, hinting at a world beyond her self-imposed isolation. Clara felt it, a subtle shift in the atmosphere, both inside and out. The fierce pride still thrummed beneath her skin, a quiet vibration that chased away the lingering echoes of despair. She looked again at the screen, at the intricate patterns she had woven from her pain, and a small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It wasn't a triumphant grin, but a gentle acknowledgement of her own resilience. Her stomach, which had been a hollow ache for days, now offered a faint grumble of protest. The digital clock on her monitor glowed, starkly displaying 2:47 a.m. She had lost herself completely, oblivious to the passage of time. The self-help book, abandoned on the coffee table 3 days prior, seemed a distant, almost comical memory. Its platitudes felt utterly inadequate in the face of the storm she had weathered. And more importantly, the art she had created from its wreckage. Pushing herself away from the desk, her muscles stiff and protesting, Clara walked over to the window. The world outside was still shrouded in the damp stillness of a receding storm, but the air felt cleaner, sharper. A faint scent of wet earth and distant asphalt drifted in through a hairline crack in the frame. She took a deep breath, letting the cool air fill her lungs, and for the first time since Michael's abrupt departure, she felt a genuine connection to something beyond her grief. It was a fragile thread, easily broken, but present nonetheless. The design on her screen, a vibrant testament to her inner turmoil and rebirth, felt like a secret weapon, a shield forged in the fires of her own sorrow. She wouldn't fade away. Not now. Not when she had just begun to truly see the colors in the dark. The rain had stopped. A thin, watery sunlight, hesitant at first, now pierced through the lingering clouds, illuminating the droplets still clinging to the window pane like scattered diamonds. Each glint was a tiny promise, a whisper of a world beyond the gray. Clara watched as a robin, its breast a brilliant splash of red against the muted greens, landed on the wet lawn, cocked its head, and then hopped with an almost audacious confidence. Life, it seemed, continued its relentless, beautiful march, oblivious to her internal struggles, yet somehow intertwined with them. A strange, almost alien sensation bloomed in her chest. Not happiness, not yet, but a burgeoning sense of possibility. The memory of Michael's face, once a sharp, aching wound, now felt like a photograph viewed through a slightly frosted pane of glass. Still there, still significant, but no longer possessing the power to completely shatter her. The bitterness that had coated her tongue for days began to recede, replaced by a nascent curiosity about the texture of the world. Her fingers, still stained with the lingering scent of charcoal and dried paint, twitched with an unfamiliar impatience. There was work to be done, certainly, but more than that, there was living to be done. The self-help book, abandoned on her nightstand, seemed to mock her with its simplistic advice. She didn't need platitudes. She needed action, creation, connection. The vibrant design on her screen, still glowing with an almost defiant energy, was a roadmap, a silent directive. It was time to step out of the shadows, to chase the light, however faint, however fleeting. The rain, a ceaseless companion for days, finally softened to a persistent drizzle, a gentle acknowledgement of her shifting mood. Clara pushed away from her desk, the faint creak of her chair, a familiar sound in the quiet apartment. Her reflection in the darkened window showed a woman still shadowed by grief, but with a new glint in her eyes, a spark that had been absent for too long. She walked to the small kitchenette, the worn wooden floor cool beneath her bare feet. The half-empty coffee mug from that morning sat accusingly on the counter, a testament to her previous inertia. She rinsed it, the mundane act a small victory, a tiny thread reweaving her back into the fabric of daily life. Her phone, a silent sentinel on the counter, vibrated. It was a message from Sarah, a former colleague, and now a friend, a fleeting thought about a new gallery opening across town. In the past, Clara would have dismissed it, claimed she was too busy, too tired, too heartbroken. But today, the idea held a strange allure. A gallery, art, people. The thought of mingling, even briefly with strangers, felt both daunting and exhilarating. It was a chance to practice this new burgeoning self, to test the waters of her own resilience. She typed a quick reply, a tentative maybe, and then, with a surge of unexpected courage, changed it to definitely. What time? The city, though still veiled in gray, suddenly felt less like a cage and more like a canvas, waiting for her to add her own vibrant strokes. The scent of fresh rain still clung to the air as Clara stepped out, a rare lightness in her stride. The maybe had blossomed into a definitely, and now, fueled by an almost forgotten anticipation, she found herself navigating the familiar labyrinth of city streets. The gallery, a modern edifice of glass and steel, pulsed with a quiet energy, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of her apartment. Inside, the hushed murmur of conversations mingled with the soft clinking of glasses. Art, vibrant and challenging, adorned the stark white walls, each piece a conversation starter, a silent invitation to engage. She spotted Sarah near a large abstract canvas, her laughter echoing lightly amidst the more subdued tones. Sarah, with her perpetual optimism and infectious energy, was a welcome sight, a beacon in Clara's recently darkened world. Their embrace was warm, genuine, a silent acknowledgement of the unspoken struggles Clara had endured. "You came," Sarah exclaimed, her eyes sparkling. "I wasn't sure you would." Clara managed a small smile, a genuine one that reached her eyes. "Neither was I," she admitted, the honesty a surprisingly liberating sensation. As they moved through the throng, Sarah effortlessly introducing her to various artists and gallery owners, Clara found herself observing, truly seeing, for the first time in what felt like an eternity. The faces around her, etched with passion and curiosity, reflected a world she had almost forgotten existed beyond the confines of her own grief. She engaged in polite conversation, offered genuine compliments on the artwork, and even found herself sharing a brief, insightful comment about a sculpture that caught her eye. It was a subtle shift, a quiet reclaiming of her voice, a gentle assertion of her presence in a world that had, for a time, felt utterly indifferent. The lightness in her chest, a sensation she hadn't realized she'd been missing until it returned, was intoxicating. Each new face, each vibrant brushstroke, each murmur of appreciation from fellow attendees chipped away at the heavy shell of despondency that had encased her for weeks. She felt a spark of her old self, the Clara who thrived on creative energy, the Clara who found joy in the nuanced expressions of human artistry. Sarah, ever the effervescent host, steered her towards a corner where a young woman with fiery red hair was animatedly discussing her abstract paintings. Clara listened, genuinely captivated by the artist's fervent explanation of her process, the way she channeled emotion into color and form. It was a stark contrast to the muted palette of Clara's own recent existence. A genuine laugh escaped her lips when the artist, misinterpreting Clara's appreciative nod, launched into an even more passionate defense of her work. The sound surprised Clara herself, a clear bell-like tone that cut through the ambient chatter, drawing a momentary glance from Sarah and a curious smile from the red-haired painter. It was a sound that had been absent from her life for too long, a testament to the suffocating silence that Michael's absence had imposed. And in that moment, enveloped by the warmth of shared passion and the gentle hum of human connection, Clara realized that the world, despite its capacity for pain, still held an abundance of beauty, waiting to be discovered anew. The realization settled over her like a comforting shawl, chasing away a sliver of the persistent chill that had clung to her spirit. She felt a subtle shift, an almost imperceptible reordering of her internal landscape. The self-help book, still tucked away in her bag, felt suddenly less urgent, less like a prescribed remedy, and more like a gentle suggestion. The rain outside continued its rhythmic drumming against the cafe window, but its melancholic cadence no longer resonated with the same crushing weight within her. Instead, it became a backdrop, a somber counterpoint to the unexpected melody of her own reawakening. Clara found herself lingering at the art display long after the red-haired artist had moved on to engage with another admirer. She ran a tentative finger along the textured canvas of a particularly vibrant piece, a swirling vortex of blues and yellows that seemed to hum with an inner energy. It reminded her, oddly, of the chaotic beauty of a storm, a force both destructive and utterly mesmerizing. A thought, nascent and fragile, began to form. Perhaps her own storm, Michael's departure, held a similar hidden beauty, a potential for new growth she hadn't yet been able to perceive. She bought a small framed print from the artist, a gesture that felt both impulsive and deeply significant. It was a simple abstract, a splash of crimson against an expanse of stark white, yet it held a raw, untamed energy that resonated with the nascent defiance stirring within her. Carrying the print carefully, as if it were a fragile bird, Clara made her way back to her apartment, the familiar streets seeming to shimmer with a new, almost vibrant hue. The key turning in the lock of her quiet apartment no longer sounded like the final click of a tomb, but rather the opening of a door to something unknown, something that, for the first time in weeks, didn't feel entirely bleak. The crimson splash on stark white found its place on the bare wall opposite her drafting table, a defiant punctuation mark in the muted palette of her living space. Its untamed energy seemed to hum, a silent counterpoint to the persistent drumming of rain against the windowpane. Clara found herself glancing at it often, a small, involuntary smile touching her lips each time. The self-help book, with its earnest promises of transformation, remained open on the coffee table, a forgotten artifact of a past self, its pages still uncreased beyond the first few chapters. The words now felt hollow, an echo of a despair she was beginning to shed. Her design work, once a source of quiet satisfaction, had become a refuge, a tangible expression of control in a world that had felt utterly chaotic. She immersed herself in a new logo commission, the precise lines and deliberate curves a soothing balm to her previously frayed nerves. The rain continued its ceaseless symphony, but its mournful quality had transformed into a rhythmic backdrop, a natural pulse to her renewed focus. She worked late into the night, the soft glow of her desk lamp illuminating her concentrated profile, the crimson print a silent witness to her quiet resurgence. A week later, the rain finally ceased, leaving behind a world scrubbed clean and glistening. The air, crisp and cool, carried the scent of wet earth and distant blossoms. Clara stepped out onto her small balcony, taking a deep, fortifying breath. The city, usually a cacophony of sound, seemed to hum with a different kind of energy, a gentle thrum of life resuming. She looked up at the sky, a vast expanse of pale blue interspersed with fluffy white clouds, and for the first time in what felt like an eternity, she felt a profound sense of lightness. The emptiness Michael had left still lingered, a phantom ache in her chest, but it no longer consumed her. It was simply a part of her, a scar that had begun to heal, teaching her a resilience she hadn't known she possessed. The newly found lightness propelled her forward, not with a sudden burst of energy, but with a quiet, persistent hum, much like the city itself. She found herself reaching for her phone less often, the urge to check for a message that would never come slowly fading. Instead, her fingers sought the familiar textures of her sketch pad, the cool metal of her stylus, the satisfying click of her mouse. Her design business, once a source of quiet anxiety, began to thrive under her renewed attention. New clients, drawn by word of mouth and her increasingly distinctive portfolio, started to fill her calendar. Each completed project, each satisfied client, added another small brick to the foundation of her rebuilding confidence. One blustery Tuesday, a notification popped up on her screen. An invitation to a local art exhibition opening. It was from Sarah, a former classmate she hadn't seen in years, who was now making a name for herself in the city's burgeoning art scene. Clara hesitated, the familiar pull of her solitary routine vying with a nascent curiosity. For so long, her world had shrunk to the confines of her apartment and the echoing silence of Michael's absence. But the memory of the rain-washed sky, the scent of fresh earth, and that unexpected lightness stirred within her. With a deep breath and a surprising surge of determination, she typed out a cheerful acceptance. The thought of stepping back into the vibrant hum of social interaction, however daunting, felt less like a chore and more like a necessary step, a conscious unmooring from the quiet harbor of her grief. The evening of the exhibition arrived, cloaked in a cool, crisp autumn air that promised a clear, star-dusted sky. Clara, after much deliberation, chose a deep emerald dress that subtly accentuated her eyes, a color she hadn't worn since before Michael. She even allowed herself a light touch of lipstick, a small rebellion against the pallor that had settled on her features. The mirror reflected a woman who was still undeniably fragile, but one who possessed a nascent spark, a quiet resolve to reclaim some semblance of her former self. The gallery, housed in a renovated industrial building, hummed with a low murmur of conversation and the clinking of glasses. The art was vibrant, challenging, and utterly absorbing, a stark contrast to the muted hues of her own recent existence. She spotted Sarah across the crowded room, her short spiky hair and confident laugh instantly recognizable. As Clara navigated through clusters of enthusiastic art lovers, a sense of nervous excitement mingled with a faint tremor of anxiety. It had been so long since she had engaged in such a public display of living. Sarah's eyes lit up as she saw Clara approaching, a genuine warmth radiating from her embrace. "Clara, I can't believe you actually came. It's so good to see you." "It's good to see you too, Sarah," Clara replied, her voice a little steadier than she had expected. "And congratulations on the exhibition. The pieces are stunning." They talked for what felt like hours, catching up on years of lost time, the conversation flowing easily between them, punctuated by shared memories and hearty laughter. Sarah, ever the perceptive friend, steered the conversation away from anything that might sting, focusing instead on the future, on art, on the sheer possibility of it all. As the night wound down and the crowd thinned, Clara felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months, a sense of belonging that had been conspicuously absent. The world, it seemed, had more colors than she remembered. The journey home in the quiet hum of a taxi felt different, less oppressive than the endless stretches of silence that had defined her recent evenings. The rain had finally ceased, leaving the city streets gleaming under the pale glow of streetlights, reflecting the sky like a shattered mirror. Clara found herself humming a forgotten tune, a simple melody from her childhood, a clear sign of the shift within her. The self-help book lay forgotten on her bedside table, its platitudes now seeming distant, almost irrelevant. Sarah's infectious optimism had provided a far more potent tonic than any prepackaged wisdom could offer. Sleep, when it came, was deep and restorative, devoid of the usual restless tossing and turning, the phantom presence of Michael beside her. She awoke to a tentative sliver of sunlight piercing through the blinds, casting a golden stripe across her duvet. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the prospect of the day ahead didn't fill her with dread. The design projects that had languished, gathering digital dust on her hard drive, now seemed less like insurmountable burdens and more like canvases awaiting her touch. She brewed a strong cup of coffee, the aroma a comforting anchor in the morning air, and walked over to her desk. The blank screen of her monitor, usually a source of quiet intimidation, now beckoned with a subtle promise. She opened the most neglected of her client files, a logo design for a fledgling bakery, a project she had started with enthusiasm before the world had tilted on its axis. As her fingers danced across the keyboard, shaping vectors and adjusting hues, a familiar thrill resurfaced, a small but potent reminder of the joy her work once brought her. The lines on the screen began to blur, not from tears, but from the focused intensity of creation, each click of the mouse a deliberate step away from the shadows. The rain, a relentless companion for days, had finally eased to a gentle patter against the window pane, a rhythm less mournful than before. Clara hadn't noticed the change until the muted light of morning, no longer battling the oppressive gray, began to filter through her apartment. It wasn't a brilliant, sun-drenched awakening, but a soft, almost hesitant glow that painted the edges of her workspace in faint silver. With each precise adjustment to the bakery's logo, a tiny seed of something akin to hope began to unfurl within her. It wasn't the kind of soaring, boundless hope that Michael's presence once inspired, but a quieter, more resilient variety rooted in the simple act of doing. Hours later, the logo was complete, a whimsical swirl of flour and an oven mitt, perfectly capturing the bakery's rustic charm. She leaned back, a sigh escaping her lips that was less exhaustion and more a release of pent-up tension. The satisfaction was immediate, a clean, sharp feeling that cut through the lingering fog of her sadness. This wasn't a cure, she knew, not for the hollow ache in her chest where Michael used to be, but it was a powerful diversion. It was a reaffirmation of her own capabilities, a quiet assertion that even without him, her hands could still create beauty, her mind could still solve problems. The self-help book lay forgotten on her bedside table, its platitudes pale in comparison to the vibrant, tangible proof of her own resilience staring back at her from the screen. She decided then, with a newfound clarity, that she wouldn't just weather this storm. She would build something magnificent within it. The rain, though still drumming a steady rhythm against her window, no longer felt like a personal assault. It was just weather, a backdrop to the burgeoning landscape of her renewed purpose. Clara closed her laptop, the soft click echoing in the sudden quiet of her apartment. The bakery logo, a small triumph, felt like a cornerstone in the foundation she was now determined to lay. She wasn't building a castle, not yet, but a sturdy shelter against the relentless gales of grief. The following morning dawned, not with sunshine, but with a lighter, less oppressive gray. Clara brewed a strong cup of coffee, the aroma a comforting anchor in the otherwise silent apartment. She pulled out a fresh sketchbook, its blank pages a canvas for the magnificent something she had vaguely conceived. The self-help book remained untouched, a testament to her shift in perspective. Instead of seeking answers in pre-written prose, she was ready to inscribe her own narrative, one stroke at a time. The first few pages were a jumble of ideas, a redesign of her website, a new portfolio, even a speculative business plan for a small curated online shop selling artisanal crafts. The flicker of defiance had indeed ignited into a steady flame, warming the cold corners of her despair. She knew the ache for Michael wouldn't simply vanish, but she was learning slowly that it didn't have to define her. Her life, though altered, was far from over. It was merely awaiting its next unwritten chapter, and she, Clara, would be its author. The coffee cooled beside her as the early afternoon light, now a muted silver, stretched further across her living room floor. Hours had melted away in a blur of furious sketching and enthusiastic note-taking. The initial jumble of ideas had begun to coalesce, taking on a more defined shape. The website redesign, once a daunting chore, now felt like an exciting opportunity to showcase her evolving aesthetic. She imagined clean lines, subtle animations, and a portfolio that spoke not just of her technical skill, but of the unique artistic voice she was finally beginning to rediscover. A faint grumble from her stomach reminded her that creativity, while nourishing to the soul, did not satiate the body. She rose, stretching the stiffness from her shoulders, and made her way to the kitchen. The refrigerator was sparsely stocked, a silent testament to the past 3 days of self-imposed isolation. A single forgotten apple and a carton of milk were all that remained of her groceries. Undeterred, she rummaged through the pantry, unearthing a forgotten box of pasta and a jar of pesto. A simple meal, perhaps, but one she would prepare with a renewed sense of purpose. As the water for the pasta began to boil, Clara found herself humming a forgotten melody, a tune from her university days, from a time when life felt limitless and unburdened. The melody was bittersweet, laced with the ghosts of past joys, yet it wasn't melancholic. It was a recognition, a quiet acknowledgement that even in the midst of change and loss, there was still a wellspring of resilience within her. She plated her meal, carrying it back to her workspace, the aroma of basil and garlic, a welcome counterpoint to the scent of ink and paper. The blank pages of her sketchbook were now filled with the nascent blueprints of her future, a future she was determined to build, one deliberate stroke at a time. The pasta, simple yet satisfying, fueled her through the evening. She worked with an intensity she hadn't felt in months, the lines on her digital canvas flowing with an almost effortless grace. Each pixel placed, each color chosen, felt like an affirmation of her renewed spirit. She wasn't just designing, she was weaving a narrative of strength and independence, a visual testament to her journey. The client project, initially a daunting reminder of neglected responsibilities, transformed under her touch into something vibrant and uniquely hers. She integrated subtle elements of her personal style, a bold stroke here, an unexpected color palette there, knowing that these choices were reflections of the woman she was becoming. When the final file was uploaded, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over her. It wasn't merely a completed task, it was a declaration. The ache of Michael's absence, though still a tender spot in her heart, had receded, no longer a gaping wound, but a scar, a mark of survival. She leaned back in her chair, gazing at the glowing screen, then at the physical sketches scattered across her desk. Business plans, marketing strategies, even a logo concept for a hypothetical design studio she envisioned. The outlines were rough, imperfect, but they thrummed with possibility. This wasn't just about moving on from Michael. It was about moving forward, into a future she was actively shaping. Pen in hand, brush on canvas, author of her own unfolding story. The digital clock on her monitor glowed 3:17 a.m. Usually such an hour would find Clara lost in the desolate landscape of her grief, staring blankly at the ceiling. Tonight, however, the late hour felt like a badge of honor, a testament to her renewed vigor. She stretched, a genuine, full-bodied stretch that reached for the ceiling, feeling the satisfying pop of vertebrae. A quiet hunger gnawed at her, a stark contrast to the days she'd forgotten to eat entirely. She padded into the kitchen, the soft glow of the refrigerator light illuminating her path. A half-eaten container of leftover pasta salad, a relic from a pre-Michael departure life, sat forlornly on a shelf. But her eyes landed on an untouched carton of fresh strawberries, a spontaneous purchase from the grocery store yesterday that now seemed almost symbolic. She washed a handful, their crimson inviting, and bit into one. The sweet tart burst of flavor was a small, exquisite pleasure, a simple joy she hadn't allowed herself in weeks. As she ate, she found herself planning, not just for her fledgling design studio, but for tomorrow, for the week ahead. A yoga class she'd always wanted to try, a long overdue visit to a friend she'd neglected, perhaps even a solo trip to the coast she'd once dreamed of taking with Michael. The thought of his name no longer sent a jolt of pain through her, but a faint, almost distant echo. It was still there, a whisper in the periphery, but it no longer commanded her attention, no longer dictated her every breath. The future, once a terrifying void, now shimmered with the promise of her own design, a canvas waiting for her boldest strokes. The next morning, a startlingly bright sun streamed through her window, banishing the last vestiges of the storm's gloom. Clara stretched, a slow, deliberate movement that felt good in her muscles, a stark contrast to the stiff, aching way she'd moved just days before. The self-help book lay open on her nightstand, its pages still unread, but its mere presence felt different now. It was no longer a mocking reminder of her helplessness, but a quiet testament to a past self, a self that was rapidly evolving. She made herself a proper breakfast, scrambled eggs, toast, and the last of the strawberries, and ate it at her small kitchen table, savoring each bite. The emails from clients, once a source of dread, now carried a different weight. She opened them, not with a sigh of resignation, but with a surge of anticipation. One, in particular, caught her eye: an inquiry about a logo design for a new independent bookstore. The project description was vibrant, hinting at a whimsical, intricate aesthetic that resonated deeply with her burgeoning style. She felt a spark, a creative fire that had been banked for too long, now roaring back to life. Later, as she walked to the yoga studio, the city felt different. The familiar streets, once a blur of indifference, now teemed with small details she hadn't noticed before. The intricate ironwork on an old building, the bright splash of graffiti on a brick wall, the scent of blooming jasmine from a hidden garden. She found herself smiling, a genuine, unforced smile that reached her eyes. The yoga class itself was a revelation. Moving through the poses, feeling her body connect with her breath, she experienced a profound sense of grounding, a quiet strength emerging from within. She left feeling lighter, both physically and emotionally, ready to embrace the day and the life that lay ahead. The bookstore logo project became her anchor, a tangible thread weaving through her days. Each line she drew, each color she chose, felt like an act of reclamation, a deliberate brushstroke on the canvas of her new existence. She spent hours lost in the work, the precise curves and playful serifs of the typography becoming a language of self-expression. The client, a woman named Eleanor with kind eyes and an infectious passion for literature, loved her initial concepts, further fueling Clara's renewed confidence. Eleanor's praise was not just for the design itself, but for the spirit it embodied, a spirit Clara was only just beginning to recognize as her own. Evenings, once a heavy expanse of solitude, now held a different quality. She began exploring new recipes, filling her apartment with the comforting aromas of rosemary and garlic. Her kitchen transformed from a functional space into a creative laboratory. She rediscovered old hobbies, dusting off her neglected watercolor set and letting vibrant hues bleed onto paper, each stroke a meditation. The apartment, once a silent witness to her despair, now hummed with a quiet energy, reflecting the vibrant life blossoming within her. She found herself engaging more with friends, accepting invitations for coffee or dinner, her laughter ringing out more freely, less guarded. There were still moments, brief and fleeting, when a pang of absence would surface, a phantom ache for the life she had once envisioned. But these moments no longer consumed her. They were like distant clouds, passing quickly across a sky that was increasingly, undeniably, her own. One crisp autumn morning, a notification chimed on her laptop, announcing an email from an unfamiliar sender. Curiosity piqued, Clara clicked it open. It was an invitation to submit her portfolio for a prestigious design competition, one she'd always admired but never dared to consider. The theme, rebirth and resilience, resonated deeply with her recent journey. A year ago, the thought of such an endeavor would have filled her with self-doubt, a debilitating echo of Michael's subtle criticisms that had chipped away at her confidence. Now, however, a different feeling stirred, a quiet, resolute excitement. She spent the next few weeks immersed in the project, pouring her newfound artistic voice into every pixel and curve. The digital art she had created during her initial storm-bound defiance became the cornerstone of her submission, evolving into a complex tapestry of vibrant colors and intricate patterns, each layer telling a story of transformation. Gone were the hesitant strokes and muted tones of her past work, replaced by bold declarations of self. The process was demanding, requiring late nights fueled by strong tea and an unwavering focus, but it was a labor of love, a testament to her strength. When she finally clicked submit, a profound sense of accomplishment washed over her, a feeling far more satisfying than any external validation. She knew deep down that she had already won, simply by daring to try. The email arrived 2 weeks later, nestled amongst the usual client inquiries and promotional spam. Its subject line, devoid of any histrionics, simply read, "Congratulations, Art Fair selection." Clara's breath caught in her throat. She had almost forgotten about the submission. So thoroughly had she detached herself from the outcome, immersing instead in the pure joy of creation. Her finger trembled slightly as she clicked it open. The message confirmed her piece had been selected for the upcoming citywide art fair, an event she had only ever dreamed of attending as a spectator. Not only that, but it had earned a prominent display slot, a detail that made her heart pound with a mixture of disbelief and exhilaration. A small, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. This wasn't about Michael, or proving anything to him. This was about Clara. This was about the defiant whisper that had grown into a resounding declaration. The next few weeks became a whirlwind of preparation. She meticulously printed and framed her selected piece, a vibrant triptych titled Resilience Bloom, each panel depicting a stage of her emotional journey from muted despair to explosive joy. She designed promotional materials, her hands moving with a confidence she hadn't possessed months ago. The art fair itself was a kaleidoscope of sensory input, the hum of conversation, the scent of fresh paint and coffee, the myriad colors and forms of artistic expression. Standing beside her work, Clara felt a surge of pride, a quiet strength emanating from within. People stopped. They looked. They lingered. Some offered genuine compliments. Others simply absorbed the visual narrative. She found herself engaging in conversations about her process, her inspiration, her transformation, speaking with an ease that surprised even herself. This wasn't just an exhibition. It was a conversation, a shared experience, and in that space, Clara felt truly, undeniably alive. The day ended not with exhaustion, but with an invigorating sense of accomplishment. She had sold 2 of her smaller prints, and a gallery owner had expressed interest in featuring Resilience Bloom in an upcoming group show. This unsolicited validation, far more potent than any carefully sought approval, settled deep within her. Packing up her display, a familiar song drifted from a nearby booth, a melancholic melody that once brought tears, now merely a gentle echo of a past self. She hummed along, a small knowing smile playing on her lips. Back in her apartment, the silence that used to feel cavernous now felt expansive, a canvas for her thoughts. She carefully unwrapped the art she had bought months ago, placing it on her desk. Its defiant strokes mirrored her own journey, a constant, tangible reminder of the breaking point that had birthed her resurgence. She opened her laptop, not for client work, but to sketch out new ideas, a series exploring urban renewal, buildings reclaiming their forgotten beauty. The concepts flowed freely, unburdened by self-doubt, fueled by an inner wellspring of creativity. The aching void Michael left had been filled, not by another person, but by a vibrant, thriving version of herself. She was the architect of her own peace, the designer of her own destiny, and the future, once a blurry, daunting expanse, now shimmered with possibility. The days that followed were a whirlwind of focused creation. Clara's apartment, once a shrine to her sorrow, became a bustling studio, her fingers dancing across the keyboard, her mind alight with conceptual brilliance. The Urban Renewal series, initially a personal catharsis, began to take on a life of its own. She rendered forgotten facades with a loving hand, imbued decaying brick with a vibrant, almost hopeful glow, and transformed neglected spaces into digital havens of art and life. Each piece was a testament to resilience, a visual narrative of beauty found in unexpected places, much like her own story. She worked long hours, fueled by strong coffee and an insatiable desire to bring her visions to life. Sleep became a brief, necessary interlude, punctuated by dreams filled with swirling colors and architectural marvels. There were moments, fleeting and almost imperceptible, when Michael's memory would surface, a particular song on the radio, the scent of a familiar spice, a glimpse of a couple walking hand in hand. But these ghosts of the past no longer held her captive. Instead, they served as distant markers, reminding her of how far she had traveled, how much she had grown. The pain was still a faint echo, a scar, but it no longer throbbed with the raw agony it once had. It was simply a part of her story, a chapter that had closed, allowing a new, more compelling narrative to unfold. One crisp morning, as the city slowly awakened outside her window, Clara finally leaned back from her screen, a profound sense of accomplishment washing over her. The series was complete. She gazed at the collection of images, each one a fragment of her soul poured onto the digital canvas. A quiet pride bloomed within her chest, a feeling far more enduring than any fleeting affection. This was hers, unequivocally. This was the tangible proof of her rebirth, a vibrant testament to the power of self-creation. The future, with all its uncharted territories, no longer felt daunting. It felt like an invitation. The invitation, when it arrived, was as sleek and minimalist as the gallery it heralded. An exclusive preview for Emergence New Voices in Digital Art, it read, with a familiar name listed among the featured artists, Clara Evans. She traced the embossed lettering with a fingertip, a small, almost imperceptible smile playing on her lips. It was more than just an invitation. It was a validation, a quiet acknowledgement of the path she had forged. She chose a dress of deep emerald silk, a color that mirrored the resilience she felt blooming within her. The gallery pulsed with a low hum of conversation, the air thick with the scent of expensive perfume and possibility. As she navigated the throng, her eyes scanned the walls, seeking out the familiar digital brushstrokes that were now so intrinsically hers. And there they were, a series of 6 panels, vibrant and raw, each telling a piece of her story, transformed from personal anguish into universal art. A hand touched her elbow, and she turned to find Sarah, her oldest friend, beaming. "Clara, I knew it was you. These are incredible." Sarah's eyes, wide with admiration, swept over the pieces. "I mean, truly. They have such depth, such life." Clara felt a warmth spread through her, a different kind of warmth than the one Michael had once offered. This was solid, earned. "Thank you, Sarah," she murmured, a genuine gratitude in her voice. "It means a lot." They talked for a while, catching up on life, on dreams, on the ever-present churn of the city. Sarah, ever perceptive, noticed the subtle shift in Clara, the newfound lightness in her demeanor. "You look happy," she observed, her voice gentle. Clara considered this. "Content," she corrected, a thoughtful flicker in her eyes. "And hopeful. It's a good place to be." As the evening drew to a close, a piece by another artist caught her eye. It was an abstract sculpture, forged from reclaimed metal, sharp angles softened by a surprising fluidity. It spoke of brokenness, made whole, of beauty found in unexpected places. She bought it, not as a symbol of defiance, but as a quiet promise to herself. A reminder that even from fragments, something beautiful and strong could emerge. Returning to her apartment, the city lights a distant glitter. Clara felt a profound sense of peace. The sculpture sat on her coffee table, a silent sentinel. The client project, a complex rebranding for a burgeoning tech startup, awaited her. She approached it now, not with obligation, but with a keen, almost eager anticipation. The design brief, once a hurdle, now felt like a playground for her revitalized creativity. Michael's absence was still a quiet ache, a phantom limb occasionally reminding her of what was lost. But it no longer anchored her to the past. Instead, it was a space, now filled with the vibrant tapestry of her own making. She opened her sketchbook, a fresh page awaiting the ink, and began to outline the next chapter, not just of her business, but of her life. The citywide art fair was a whirlwind of vibrant colors and hushed appreciation. Clara, surrounded by the murmur of admiring voices and the warmth of reconnecting with old friends, felt a lightness she hadn't experienced in months. Resilience bloom, pulsed with an inner light, a testament to the storm she had weathered and the beauty she had coaxed from its wreckage. The recognition was sweet, a quiet validation that transcended mere accolades. It was a confirmation of her own strength, a tangible manifestation of her refusal to wither. The rebranding project, a complex web of corporate identity and creative vision, consumed her days in the most exhilarating way. Each pixel placed, each font selected, felt like a deliberate stroke of her own reinvention. She found herself thriving in the meticulous demands, the strategic thinking, the quiet satisfaction of bringing order and beauty to disparate elements. Michael's absence, once a gaping wound, had receded into a dull ache, a distant echo that no longer dictated her present. Instead, her days were filled with the hum of her creative software, the scent of freshly brewed coffee, and the quiet joy of solitary achievement. One crisp autumn evening, as the city lights began to twinkle outside her studio window, Clara paused, a half-finished sketch glowing on her tablet. A smile, slow and genuine, touched her lips. She didn't need grand gestures or dramatic pronouncements. Her future wasn't a void to be filled, but a canvas to be painted, stroke by deliberate stroke. The resilience bloom had not just survived, it had flourished. Its roots deep, its petals unfurling towards a horizon she was now creating, vibrant and entirely her own. She was not just content, she was complete, a woman reborn, charting her own luminous course.